The morning mist clung to the windows of Murphy's Corner Café, like memories that refused to fade. Warren Buffett pushed through the glass door, his worn khakis wrinkled from the Nebraska wind, his old sweater bearing the familiar pills of countless washes. The brass bell above the door chimed the same note it had for 37 years, though Warren was perhaps the only soul left who remembered when it first sang. He paused just inside the threshold, breathing in the aroma of coffee beans and something that transported him instantly to 1987, to a younger man's dreams and a handshake that meant everything. The café had changed. Where once stood mismatched chairs and tables that wobbled with character, now gleamed modern fixtures and sleek surfaces that reflected nothing but their own cold perfection. Behind the polished counter stood a man Warren didn't recognize, tall, angular, with the kind of pressed efficiency that spoke of business school and quarterly projections. His name tag read Marcus Chen, owner-manager, and his eyes swept over Warren with the swift calculation of someone who had learned to measure worth in appearances. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice carrying the practiced politeness of someone who had delivered this speech before. "I'm sorry, but we have a dress code policy here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Warren's weathered hands stilled on the counter's edge. For a moment, time seemed to pause, the espresso machine's hiss fading to silence, the morning conversations of other patrons becoming mere whispers. He looked down at his clothes, then back at Marcus, and something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but a deep, quiet sadness that seemed to carry the weight of decades. "A dress code," Warren repeated softly, his voice barely audible above the cafe's ambient hum. "I see." The words hung in the air like dust motes in morning sunlight, delicate and somehow precious. Warren's fingers traced the counter's surface. New granite where once had been worn formica that bore the ring stains of 10,000 coffee cups and the dreams they had caffeinated. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his confidence wavering slightly at the gentle dignity in the older man's voice. "It's nothing personal. It's just, we've worked hard to build a certain atmosphere here. Our clientele expects—" "Your clientele," Warren interrupted gently, and in those two words lay a story that Marcus couldn't yet hear. "Tell me, son, how long have you owned this place?" 2 years, Marcus replied, straightening his tie. "I bought it from some old man who was running it into the ground. Murphy, I think his name was. Place was a disaster. Outdated equipment, no systems, terrible. Location, I've completely transformed it." Warren nodded slowly, his eyes now moving past Marcus to the wall where a new flat-screen television displayed stock prices in crawling red and green numbers. Where that screen now hung, there had once been a simple wooden frame containing a photograph, a young Irish immigrant shaking hands with a 20-something Warren Buffett, both men grinning with the infectious optimism of a deal struck not just on paper, but in trust. "James Murphy," Warren said, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. "Jamie." "You knew him?" Marcus asked, his tone shifting slightly, curiosity beginning to crack through his professional facade. Warren's mind drifted back through the decades, to a morning not unlike this one, when the cafe had been nothing more than a dream, sketched on a napkin. Jamie Murphy had been 28 then, fresh off the boat from County Cork, with calloused hands, and a smile that could make even Warren's calculated caution melt into genuine warmth. "I need $100,000, Jamie had said that first morning, his Irish accent thick with nervousness and hope. "I know you don't know me from Adam, but I've got a plan, Mr. Buffett. This corner, it's going to be something special." Warren had listened, really listened, as Jamie laid out his vision with the passion of someone who saw not just a business, but a community gathering place, a sanctuary where the lonely could find company, where deals could be struck over handshakes instead of contracts, where the aroma of fresh coffee could make even the hardest day feel manageable. Most investors would have seen only the numbers, a high-risk venture in an uncertain location with an unproven owner. But Warren had seen something else in Jamie's eyes, the same hunger for meaning that had driven his own journey from a paper route in Omaha to the halls of Wall Street and back again. "I'll give you the money," Warren had said simply, "but not as a loan, as an investment, partners." The handshake that followed had been worth more than any contract. For 35 years, Murphy's Corner Café had thrived, becoming exactly what Jamie had envisioned, a place where Warren could slip in unnoticed, shed the weight of his public persona, and simply be a man who appreciated good coffee and better conversation. "Mr. Buffett," Marcus's voice pulled Warren back to the present. "Did you say something?" Warren blinked, realizing he had been standing in silence for nearly a minute, lost in memories that felt more real than the gleaming surfaces surrounding him. "I was just thinking about Jamie," he said quietly. "About what this place used to." Marcus's expression was changing, uncertainty replacing his earlier confidence. Something in Warren's tone, in the way he spoke Jamie's name with such familiar affection, was beginning to register. "Wait," Marcus said slowly. "What did you say your name was?" Warren hadn't said his name. In 35 years of visits to this cafe, he had rarely needed to. Jamie had known him simply as Warren, not the Warren Buffett of headlines and shareholder letters, but Warren the friend who always ordered black coffee and left tips larger than his bill. "Warren," he said simply. "Warren Buffett." The color drained from Marcus's face as if someone had opened a valve. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without sound. Around them, the cafe's morning rhythm continued, steam rising from cups, quiet conversations mixing with the gentle jazz playing overhead. But for Marcus, the world had suddenly tilted off its axis. Marcus began, his voice barely a whisper. "Jamie never told you about our arrangement?" Warren asked, though the answer was already written in Marcus's expression, "about the partnership." Marcus shook his head slowly, his confident demeanor crumbling like a house of cards in a gentle breeze. He never mentioned, the paperwork just showed he owned it outright. There was no mention of any partners or investors. Warren nodded, understanding flooding his features. Of course, Jamie hadn't mentioned it. That would have been just like him, protecting Warren's privacy even in death, ensuring that their friendship remained sacred, untouched by the complications that fame inevitably brought. "Jamie was a good man," Warren said softly. "A proud man. The kind who would work 18-hour days rather than ask for help even from a friend." The past tense hung heavy between them, and Marcus realized with dawning horror that he was hearing about James Murphy, truly hearing about him for the first time. In his eagerness to transform and modernize, he had never bothered to learn about the man who had built this place with his own hands and heart. "The cafe was struggling those last few years," Marcus said quietly, shame beginning to color his voice. He was behind on rent, equipment was breaking down, customers were going elsewhere. "I thought I was doing him a favor by buying it." Warren's eyes were kind, but there was a depth of sadness in them that made Marcus feel suddenly small. "Jamie never cared much about money," Warren said. "He cared about people, about creating something that mattered." As if summoned by their conversation, Warren's memory conjured another scene, Jamie's 70th birthday, just 2 years ago. The old Irishman had insisted on keeping the cafe open, refusing Warren's suggestion that they close early for a private celebration. "This place doesn't belong to me," Jamie had said, gesturing to the worn but beloved space around them. "It belongs to everyone who needs it. Mrs. Patterson comes here every morning at 6:30 because it's the only hour of the day she doesn't feel lonely. Young Tommy from the college stops by between his 2 jobs because we're the only place that lets him study without buying something every hour. You take that away from people, even for one evening, and you're not celebrating, you're forgetting what matters. That had been Jamie Murphy in a nutshell, a man who measured success not in profit margins, but in the number of lives he had touched, the moments of human connection he had facilitated, the sanctuary he had created in a world that often felt too harsh and fast and indifferent. I changed everything, Marcus said, his voice barely audible. The furniture, the menu, the prices, the whole atmosphere. I thought I was improving it. Warren looked around the transformed space with new eyes, seeing it now through Marcus's perspective. The sleek surfaces that had felt cold to him probably represented progress to Marcus, efficiency, modernity, success as measured by the business school textbooks he had undoubtedly studied. You weren't wrong to want to improve it, Warren said, gently. Jamie would have understood that, but improvement without understanding what you're improving from, that's just change for its own sake. The weight of Warren's words settled over Marcus like a blanket, not harsh or judgmental, but heavy with truth. He had bought a business without buying its story, acquired a place without understanding its purpose. I've ruined it, haven't I? Marcus asked, and for the first time since Warren had entered, his voice carried no pretense, no professional polish, just honest regret. Warren was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving slowly around the cafe. He could see traces of the old place if he looked carefully. The same basic layout, the same morning light streaming through windows that had been Jamie's pride and joy, the same corner booth where he used to sit and watch the world wake up. Ruined is a strong word, Warren said finally, but you've lost something precious. The question is, do you want to find it again? Marcus looked up sharply, hope flickering in his eyes like a candle flame in the wind. Is that possible? I mean, can something like that be recovered? Warren smiled then, the first real smile Marcus had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. This wasn't the polite mask of public appearances or the calculated expression of boardroom negotiations. This was the smile of a man who had spent decades learning that the most valuable investments couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. Let me tell you about the first time I met Jamie, Warren said, settling onto one of the modern bar stools that had replaced the old mismatched chairs. It was 1987, and I had just finished a particularly brutal day of meetings. Shareholders, analysts, reporters, everyone wanting a piece of Warren Buffett, everyone treating me like I was some kind of oracle instead of just a man who happened to be good with numbers. Marcus found himself leaning forward, caught up despite himself in Warren's quiet, storytelling voice. I was driving home, feeling about as far from myself as I'd ever felt, when I saw this little cafe with a grand opening banner hanging crooked across the window. Something about it, maybe the fact that the banner was homemade, or that there were only 3 cars in the parking lot, made me pull over. Warren's eyes grew distant with memory. Jamie was behind the counter, nervous as a cat, apologizing to every customer for something. The coffee was too hot, the muffins were too small, the change was taking too long. He was trying so hard to be perfect that he was missing the most important thing. Which was? Marcus asked softly. That his customers weren't looking for perfection. They were looking for connection, for a place that felt like home. Warren paused, remembering the moment when Jamie had finally noticed him sitting in the corner booth, reading the morning paper and nursing his second cup of coffee. I sat there for 2 hours that first morning, Warren continued, just watching, listening. Jamie served a businessman who was clearly having a terrible day, and instead of just taking his order, he asked about it. Really asked. Turned out the man had just lost a big client. Jamie didn't offer empty platitudes or business advice. He just listened, poured the coffee a little stronger, and refused to take payment. Marcus felt something stir in his chest. Recognition. Perhaps or longing for something he hadn't even known he was missing. That's when I knew Jamie understood something that most business owners never figure out, Warren said. Success isn't about maximizing every transaction. It's about maximizing every relationship. The morning rush was beginning to build around them now, young professionals in sharp suits ordering complicated drinks with efficient precision. Marcus watched them with new eyes, seeing how they moved through his cafe like it was just another stop on their daily route. Functional, forgettable, interchangeable with a dozen other coffee shops in the city. I've turned it into exactly what you just described, Marcus said quietly. Another transaction. Warren nodded slowly. The good news is that people haven't changed. They still need what Jamie was offering. They just don't know they can find it here anymore. But how do I can't just flip a switch and become Jamie Murphy. No, Warren agreed. But you can become Marcus Chen, the version of Marcus Chen who understands that a cafe isn't really about coffee. Warren stood then, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Would you like to see something? Marcus nodded, following Warren to the corner where the new television displayed its endless stream of financial data. Warren pointed to the wall beside it. There used to be a photograph there, Warren said. Jamie and me, the day we shook hands on our partnership. He kept it there for 35 years, even though I asked him to take it down a dozen times. Said it reminded him of something important. What? Marcus asked. That trust isn't about contracts or guarantees. It's about seeing something good in someone and choosing to believe in it, even when the numbers don't add up. Warren reached into his wallet, an old, worn leather thing that looked like it had been carried through decades of important moments, and pulled out a folded photograph. He handed it to Marcus with the care of someone passing along a sacred relic. The photograph was faded, but clear. Two men, one young and Irish with nervous excitement in his eyes, the other young and American with quiet confidence, shaking hands. Across a counter that Marcus recognized as the same one they were standing beside now, though it looked completely different, surrounded by the old cafe's warmth and character. Jamie kept the original, Warren said softly. But he insisted I take a copy, said I might need it someday to remember what really matters. Marcus stared at the photograph, seeing not just two men making a business deal, but two people choosing to trust each other, to build something together, to believe that their handshake was worth more than any legal document. Mr. Buffett, Marcus began, then stopped, struggling with words that seemed too small for what he was feeling. Warren corrected gently. Jamie never called me Mr. Buffett. Said it made me sound like someone he'd never want to have coffee with. Warren, Marcus tried again, the name feeling strange but somehow right on his tongue. I don't know how to make this right. I don't know how to undo what I've done or become what this place needs. Warren was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus's face with the same careful attention he had once given to Jamie's nervous energy all those years ago. Can I ask you something? Marcus nodded. Why did you buy this place? Not the business reasons, the real reason. Marcus was quiet for a long time, long enough that Warren began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was so soft that Warren had to lean in to hear him. My grandmother, Marcus said. She raised me after my parents died. Every morning before school, she'd take me to this little cafe in Chinatown. Nothing fancy, just a place where the owner knew her name, knew how she liked her tea, knew that I was nervous about a math test or excited about a baseball game. Warren waited, sensing there was more. She died right before I graduated from business school, Marcus continued, and I realized that all my education, all my ambition, none of it meant anything compared to those morning conversations over tea. When I saw this place was for sale, I thought maybe I could create that feeling for other people. What happened? Warren asked gently. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Business school happened, market research and profit margins and customer demographics. I convinced myself that sentiment was the enemy of success. Warren nodded, understanding more than Marcus realized. I spent years making that same mistake, he said, thinking that emotions were inefficient, that sentiment was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. What changed? Marcus asked. Jamie, Warren said simply. He taught me that the best investments aren't in companies or commodities. They're in people, in relationships, in the kind of trust that can't be quantified but can transform everything. Warren walked slowly around the modern cafe, his fingers trailing along surfaces that bore no trace of the thousands of stories they had witnessed. You want to know what Jamie's secret was? Marcus nodded eagerly. He never forgot that everyone who walked through that door was someone's grandson, someone's mother, someone's hope for a better day. He served coffee, but what he really provided was dignity, recognition, the sense that you mattered. The morning rush was in full swing now, customers flowing in and out with efficient precision. Marcus watched them with new eyes, seeing not just transactions but opportunities, chances to touch a life, to offer something more than caffeine and calories. It's not too late, is it? Marcus asked. And Warren heard in his voice the same nervous hope that Jamie had carried 37 years ago. Warren smiled, the same smile that had given a young Irish immigrant the courage to dream bigger than his circumstances. Do you remember your grandmother's favorite tea? Marcus blinked, surprised by the question. Jasmine tea. She always said it tasted like hope. Then you know exactly where to start. What happened next unfolded with the quiet magic of ordinary. Moments transformed by extraordinary intention. Warren stayed through the morning rush, not as a customer, but as a witness to Marcus's gradual awakening. He watched as Marcus began to really see his customers. The businessman who ordered the same double espresso every morning at exactly 8:15, the young mother who juggled a baby and a laptop while trying to steal a few moments of adult conversation, the elderly man who made his single cup of coffee last for 2 hours because he had nowhere else to go. By noon, Marcus had done something he hadn't done since opening the renovated cafe. He had learned 3 customers' names. It's harder than I thought, Marcus confessed during a brief lull. Remembering everyone, caring about their stories, Jamie made it look effortless. Jamie had 35 years of practice, Warren reminded him. And he had something else. He had failure. Marcus looked up sharply. Failure. The first 5 years were brutal, Warren said. There were months when Jamie could barely make rent, when he was working 20-hour days and still falling behind. But those failures taught him something that success never could, that people are loyal not to your perfection, but to your humanity. Warren pulled out his phone, a simple model that drew amused smiles from people who expected tech sophistication from one of the world's richest men, and showed Marcus a text message. From 3 months after Jamie opened, Warren said, 2 in the morning. The message was short. Warren, I think I'm failing. Don't know if I can make payroll next week. Too proud to ask for help, too scared not to. What would you do? What did you tell him? Marcus asked. Nothing, Warren said. I drove over at 3 in the morning and found him sitting in the dark cafe, surrounded by bills he couldn't pay and dreams that seemed to be slipping away. Warren's voice grew soft with memory. We sat there until sunrise, just talking, not about money or business plans or strategies, about why it mattered, about the businessman who had started staying an extra 10 minutes each morning because Jamie remembered his daughter's name, about the college student who had started writing her thesis at table 7 because something about the atmosphere helped her think, about Mrs. Patterson, who had told Jamie that his cafe was the only place where she felt like herself again after her husband died. Marcus was quiet, absorbing the weight of responsibility that came with creating a space where people invested. pieces of their lives. That's when Jamie figured out the secret, Warren continued. Success in business isn't about being indispensable. It's about making other people feel indispensable. The afternoon brought a different rhythm to the cafe, slower and more contemplative. Warren found himself remembering dozens of conversations he'd had with Jamie over the years, about markets and money, yes, but more often about life, about meaning, about the strange alchemy that transformed mere transactions into genuine human connection. "There's something I need to tell you," Warren said as the shadows began to lengthen outside the cafe windows. "About the partnership." Marcus tensed, clearly expecting some revelation about debts or obligations he had inherited unknowingly. "Jamie tried to buy me out 6 times over the years," Warren said. "Every time the cafe started doing well, he'd insist that he could afford to be a sole owner, that he didn't need a partner anymore." "What did you tell him?" "That he was missing the point," Warren said with a gentle smile. "I didn't invest in his cafe because I needed the money. I invested because I needed what he was building." Marcus frowned, not understanding. "For 35 years, Warren explained, "this place has been my refuge. Not because I'm Warren Buffett here, but because I'm not. Jamie never asked for stock tips or investment advice. He never treated me like a walking ATM or a networking opportunity. He just served me coffee and let me be human." The truth of it settled over Marcus like dawn breaking, slowly, then all at once. "That's why you kept coming back." "That's why I became a partner in the first place," Warren corrected. "Most investments are about getting something back. This one was about having something to come home to." Warren stood then, preparing to leave, as the late afternoon light cast long shadows across the cafe floor. "I want to show you one more thing before I go." He led Marcus to the kitchen, past the gleaming new equipment that hummed with efficient precision. In the very back, behind the industrial coffee machine, was a small alcove that Marcus had never noticed, or had dismissed as wasted space in his renovation plans. Warren knelt down and moved aside a piece of equipment, revealing a small wooden shelf that had been built into the wall. On it sat a single item, an old mason jar filled with folded pieces of paper. "Jamie's gratitude jar," Warren said softly. "Every time someone thanked him for something, a kind word, a free coffee during a hard time, a place to sit when they needed to think, he'd write it down and put it in here." Marcus picked up the jar with reverent hands. Through the glass, he could see dozens of small papers, each one a testament to a moment when Jamie Murphy had made someone's day a little brighter. "Read one," Warren suggested. Marcus unscrewed the lid and pulled out a random slip of paper. Written in Jamie's careful handwriting were the words, "Mrs. Chen said I saved her life today. All I did was notice she seemed sad and asked if she was okay. Sometimes the smallest questions have the biggest answers." Marcus's breath caught in his throat. "Mrs. Chen, that was my grandmother's maiden name." Warren nodded slowly. "Jamie mentioned her a few times over the years. An elderly Chinese woman who came in every morning for jasmine tea. He said she always looked like she was carrying the weight of the world, until one morning when he finally asked her about it." Marcus felt tears beginning to gather in his eyes. His grandmother had never told him about her conversations with Jamie, but now he understood why she had insisted on coming to this particular cafe every morning, why she had spoken of it with such warmth and gratitude in her final years. "She told him about you," Warren continued gently. "About raising her grandson alone, about worrying whether she was giving you everything you needed, about her dreams that you would grow up to build something meaningful with your life." The jar slipped slightly in Marcus's hands as the full weight of connection, past and present, grandmother and grandson, dream and reality, settled over him. "She knew," he whispered. "She knew what this place was." "And now you know what it could be again," Warren said. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two men separated by decades and experience, but connected by the recognition that some, in things, kindness, dignity, the simple act of seeing another person's humanity, transcended all other measures of worth. "Warren," Marcus said finally, "the partnership, does it still exist? Legally, I mean?" Warren smiled, the expression crinkling, the corners of his eyes in a way that made him look decades younger. "Do you want it to?" Marcus thought about his business school training, about profit margins and ownership stakes, and all the rational reasons why partnering with Warren Buffett would complicate his simple cafe beyond recognition. Then he thought about his grandmother, about Jamie Murphy, about the weight of responsibility that came with carrying on something larger than yourself. "Yes," he said simply, "I think I do." "Then it never ended," Warren said, extending his hand. "Jamie made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd make sure this place stayed true to what it was meant to be. I think he'd approve of the new management." They shook hands across the kitchen of Murphy's Corner Café, and in that gesture lived the echo of another handshake, 37 years earlier, when two strangers had chosen to trust each other with their dreams. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now you learn," Warren said. "You make mistakes. You figure out what matters and what doesn't. You discover that running a cafe isn't really about coffee. It's about creating space for people to be their best selves." Warren headed toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Jamie always opened at 5:30 in the morning, an hour before he advertised. Never told anyone why." "Why?" Marcus asked. "For the people who needed coffee before they were ready to face the world," Warren said. "The night shift workers heading home, the insomniacs who'd given up on sleep, the folks dealing with crisis or heartbreak or just the ordinary weight of being human. He said those were the customers who needed him most." As Warren pushed through the door, the brass bell chimed its familiar song. Marcus stood alone in the transformed cafe, seeing it now with completely different eyes. The sleek surfaces remained, the modern equipment still hummed efficiently. But something essential had shifted. Purpose had returned. Intention had replaced mere transaction. That evening, Marcus worked late into the night, not on spreadsheets or business plans, but on small changes that would signal larger transformations. He researched suppliers for jasmine, tea. He found a frame for the photograph Warren had given him. He wrote a note to himself about learning his regular customers' names. Most importantly, he sat in the corner booth where Warren had told him Jamie used to watch the world wake up. And he thought about what it meant to serve not just coffee, but dignity, not just food, but connection, not just convenience, but sanctuary. The next morning, Marcus arrived at 5:15, 15 minutes before Jamie's old opening time. He made his first pot of coffee in the dark, quiet cafe and waited to see if anyone would come. At 5:45, an elderly woman pushed through the door, looking surprised to find the lights on. "Are you open?" she asked hesitantly. "For you," Marcus said. "We're always open. What can I get you?" "Just coffee," she said. "Black. I work the night shift at the hospital, and most places won't serve someone like me this early." Marcus poured her coffee in the cafe's finest cup, not a to-go, container, and set it on the counter. "Someone like you." She gestured to her scrubs, slightly wrinkled from a long night of caring for others. "You know, tired, not exactly the kind of customer most places want." Marcus looked at her, really looked, and saw not someone to be tolerated, but someone to be honored. A woman who had spent the night caring for people at their most vulnerable, who deserved not just coffee, but gratitude. "Ma'am," he said gently, "people like you are exactly the kind of customers this place was built for." As she settled into a corner booth with her coffee, Marcus felt something click into place. Not the satisfaction of a successful transaction, but the deeper fulfillment of purpose, recognized and embraced. By 7 o'clock, word had somehow spread. The early crowd included not just his usual rush of suited professionals, but the night shift workers Jamie had once served, the folks who needed coffee before they were ready to face the world. Marcus moved between them with growing confidence, learning names, remembering preferences, asking the kind of questions that turned strangers into neighbors. Warren arrived at his usual time, 7:30, and found a very different cafe than the one he had left the evening before. The physical space remained the same, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. People lingered instead of rushing. Conversations bloomed instead of withering. Laughter filled spaces that had been silent. "One black coffee," Marcus said, setting Warren's usual order on the counter before he could ask for it. Warren smiled, recognizing the gesture not as mere efficiency but as acknowledgement, as the kind of attention that said, "You matter here, you belong here, you are seen." "How was your first morning?" Warren asked. "Terrifying," Marcus admitted. "And perfect." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the cafe come alive with the kind of energy that couldn't be manufactured or marketed, only created through the patient accumulation of small kindnesses and genuine attention. "Jamie would be proud," Warren said finally. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight and wonder of legacy, of carrying forward something larger than himself. In his pocket, he carried the photograph Warren had given him, and in his heart, he carried the growing understanding that some investments couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. As Warren settled into his usual corner booth, Marcus returned to his work behind the counter, but it didn't feel like work anymore. It felt like purpose. It felt like coming home to a place he had never known he was looking for. The morning light streamed through the cafe windows, illuminating faces and conversations, hopes and dreams, the eternal human need for connection and dignity, and the simple recognition that everyone who walked through that door mattered. And in that light, Warren Buffett sat with his black coffee and his morning paper, not as one of the world's most successful investors, but as what he had always been in this sacred space, simply Warren, a man who understood that the most valuable returns couldn't be calculated on any balance sheet. Outside, the world rushed by with its endless demands and complications. But inside Murphy's Corner Cafe, time moved differently, generously, with the patient rhythm of relationships being built one conversation at a time, one cup of coffee at a time, one moment of recognition at a time. Some investments don't show returns on paper, only in people. The weeks that followed brought a transformation so gradual and profound that Marcus sometimes wondered if he was dreaming. Each morning at 5:15, he unlocked the doors of Murphy's Corner Cafe, and each morning brought new discoveries about what it meant to truly serve people rather than simply serve coffee. Mrs. Rodriguez, the night shift nurse, became his first regular. She arrived every morning at 5:45, exhausted but somehow still radiant with the quiet dignity of someone who had spent her night healing others. Marcus learned that she had 3 children, that she was studying for her nurse practitioner certification, that she sent money back to her mother in El Salvador every month. He began keeping fresh pastries warm for her, knowing she rarely had time for breakfast between her shift and getting her kids ready for school. "You don't have to do this," she protested the third morning when he handed her a warm croissant alongside her coffee. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Marcus said gently, "after 12 hours of taking care of everyone else, someone should take care of you." The look in her eyes, surprise melting into gratitude, the sudden brightness of recognition that she mattered, taught Marcus more about business than any textbook ever had. This was what Jamie had understood, what Warren had invested in all those years ago, the profound return on investment that came from treating every person as if they were the most important customer who had ever walked through your door. By the third week, the early morning crowd had grown. Word spread in the quiet way that good news travels among people who work while the rest of the world sleeps. The security guard from the office building next door started stopping by for coffee and conversation. A taxi driver named Miguel began ending his night shift at Marcus's counter, sharing stories about the city in the hours when it belonged to dreamers and insomniacs and those who kept the world running while others slept. Warren watched this transformation with the quiet satisfaction of someone witnessing a seed he had planted finally breaking through the soil. He arrived each morning at his usual 7:30, but now he found a cafe that hummed with the kind of energy that couldn't be manufactured, only cultivated through patience, attention, and genuine care. "You're starting to understand, Warren," said one morning, settling into his corner booth with his black coffee. Marcus looked around the cafe, seeing it with eyes that were learning to recognize the invisible threads connecting each person to every other person. At table 3, Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman Jamie had mentioned in his memories, sat with her morning tea and newspaper, no longer the picture of loneliness, but someone who clearly felt she belonged. At the counter, a young father named David balanced his toddler on his hip while ordering coffee, grateful for a place where children were welcomed rather than tolerated. "I'm starting to see what you and Jamie saw," Marcus replied. "It's not about the coffee at all, is it?" Warren smiled, the expression carrying decades of understanding earned through careful observation of human nature. "Coffee is just the excuse people use to give themselves permission to need something more." "What do you mean?" "Think about Mrs. Rodriguez," Warren said. "She could make coffee at home or stop at any of the dozen drive-thrus between here and her house, but she comes here because here someone knows her name. Someone cares that she's tired. Someone recognizes that her work matters." Marcus nodded, understanding blooming in his chest like warmth spreading from a perfect cup of coffee. "She doesn't come for caffeine. She comes for dignity." "Now you're getting it," Warren said. "That's what Jamie figured out in those early years. People don't just want to be served. They want to be seen. They want to matter to someone, even if it's just the person behind the counter who remembers how they like their coffee." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young woman Marcus had never seen before. She stood hesitantly in the doorway, looking around the cafe with the kind of careful assessment that spoke of someone who had been disappointed before. Her clothes were neat but worn, her posture carrying the particular tension of someone trying to decide if they could afford to be there. Marcus approached her with the gentle confidence he had been developing. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" Just coffee," she said quietly. "Black, small." Marcus poured her a medium coffee in one of the cafe's ceramic mugs, not the small size she had requested, not a disposable cup that would signal she wasn't welcome to stay. "On the house," he said simply. "You look like you could use a good morning." Her eyes widened with surprise and something that might have been relief. "I can pay," she said quickly. "I'm sure you can," Marcus replied, "but sometimes the best part of someone's day starts with a small kindness from a stranger." The young woman, Sarah, he would learn later, found a table by the window and sat with her coffee as if it were a treasure she had been given rather than a simple beverage. Marcus watched her from behind the counter, noting how she seemed to relax for the first time since entering, how the worry lines around her eyes softened as she realized she was in a place where no one would judge her or hurry her along. Warren had observed the entire interaction from his corner booth, and when Marcus returned to wipe down the counter, he spoke quietly. "Jamie used to say that you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by how they treated someone who couldn't help them in return." "Is that what I just did?" Marcus asked. "You just invested in someone's day without expecting anything back," Warren said. "That's the most valuable kind of investment there is." The morning rush brought its usual crowd of professionals and commuters, but Marcus moved through it with a different kind of attention now. He had learned that efficiency and care weren't mutually exclusive, that remembering someone's name took no longer than not remembering it, that a genuine smile cost nothing but was worth everything to the person receiving it. Large coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, he said to Mr. Thompson, a banker who had been coming in for 3 weeks. Mr. Thompson paused, clearly surprised to be recognized and remembered. How did you know? It's my job to know, Marcus said simply. How's your daughter's recital preparation going? The surprise deepened into something warmer. Mr. Thompson had mentioned his daughter's piano recital in passing the week before, a comment Marcus had filed away, not for any business purpose, but because it was part of what made Mr. Thompson human, rather than simply another customer. She's nervous, Mr. Thompson admitted, his professional demeanor softening. Big performance tomorrow night. She'll be wonderful, Marcus said, with the kind of confidence that came from understanding that sometimes people needed to hear good things about the people they loved. Tell her the whole cafe is rooting for her. As Mr. Thompson left, Marcus caught Warren watching him with an expression of quiet approval. Jamie would have said exactly the same thing, Warren said. How do you know? Because I watched him do it 1,000 times. The difference between a transaction and a relationship is remembering that every person who walks through that door is someone's whole world. The afternoon brought a different rhythm, and with it, new lessons in the art of creating sanctuary. Marcus had begun to notice patterns, how certain customers preferred certain tables, how the afternoon light fell across the cafe in ways that made some spaces feel more private than others, how the rhythm of conversation and silence created its own kind of music. Around 2 o'clock, an elderly man entered whom Marcus recognized but had never served. He moved slowly, with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had begun to betray him, and settled into a table near the back corner. Marcus approached with coffee and a gentle smile. "Afternoon," he said. "I'm Marcus. I don't think we've officially met." The man looked up with eyes that carried the weight of decades. "Frank," he said simply, "I used to come in here before." Marcus understood immediately. Frank had been one of Jamie's regulars, someone who had stopped coming. When the cafe changed, when it no longer felt like the place he remembered. "Before was a long time ago," Marcus said gently. "But some things don't change. Would you like your usual?" Frank's eyes sharpened with interest. "You don't know what my usual was." Marcus smiled, remembering Warren's stories about Jamie's legendary memory for details that mattered. "No, but I'd like to learn. What made this place special for you before?" Frank was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus with the careful attention of someone deciding whether to trust. Finally, he spoke. "Jamie used to make this terrible coffee," he said, and for the first time, Marcus saw the ghost of a smile on his weathered face. "Absolutely terrible. But he made it exactly the way I liked it, and he never made me feel like I was taking up space I couldn't afford." Marcus nodded, understanding not just the words, but the longing behind them. "I can't promise to make terrible coffee," he said, "but I can promise you'll never feel like you're taking up space you can't afford." Frank's smile became real then, transforming his entire face. "In that case, I'll have coffee, black, strong enough to wake the dead, and hot enough to burn through cheap cups." As Marcus prepared Frank's coffee, he felt the profound satisfaction of healing something that had been broken. This was what Warren had meant about investment and return, not the mathematical kind, but the human kind that multiplied in ways that couldn't be calculated, but could be felt in every interaction that followed. Warren stayed later than usual. That day, ostensibly reading his paper, but actually observing the subtle changes in the cafe's atmosphere. He watched Frank settle into his old rhythms, watched Sarah return for her second visit of the week, watched Mrs. Rodriguez stop by after her shift to introduce Marcus to her youngest daughter. "You're building something here," Warren told Marcus, as the afternoon light began to slant through the windows. "Something that matters." Marcus looked around the cafe, seeing not just the physical space, but the web of relationships that were beginning to form within it. "It's what you and Jamie built," he said. "I'm just continuing it." "No," Warren said firmly. "What Jamie and I built was the foundation. What you're building is your own, different but rooted in the same understanding of what people really need." That evening, Marcus stayed late again, but this time he wasn't working on business plans or efficiency. Improvements. Instead, he sat in the corner booth where Warren spent his mornings, and he thought about legacy, not the kind measured in profit margins or market share, but the kind measured in moments of human connection, in the gradual accumulation of small kindnesses that somehow added up to something larger than their individual parts. He pulled out Jamie's gratitude jar, which he had moved to a place of honor behind the counter, and added his own note. "Frank came back today. 37 years of terrible coffee, and he came back because someone made him feel like he belonged. Some investments appreciate in ways you never expect." The weeks turned into months, and Murphy's Corner Café settled into rhythms that honored both its past and its future. The morning crowd of night shift workers became as regular and reliable as the afternoon crowd of retirees and the evening crowd of students and freelancers who needed a place to work and think and simply exist without judgment. Warren continued his daily visits, but his role had evolved from mentor to witness. He watched Marcus navigate the challenges that came with running a business rooted in relationships rather than transactions, the customers who tried to take advantage of kindness, the financial pressures that made every act of generosity feel like a risk, the exhaustion that came from caring genuinely about dozens of people's daily experiences. "Some days are harder than others," Marcus confessed one morning when a particularly difficult customer had berated him for a perceived slight that existed only in the customer's imagination. "Jamie had those days too," Warren said. "The difference between success and failure isn't avoiding difficult people. It's not letting difficult people change who you choose to be with everyone else." Marcus nodded, understanding that this too was part of the investment Warren had made all those years ago. Not just money, but wisdom. Not just partnership, but mentorship in the art of remaining human in a world that often rewarded the opposite. The true test came on a Tuesday morning in November when Marcus arrived to find Frank collapsed outside the cafe, too weak to make it to the door. Marcus called an ambulance and rode with Frank to the hospital, staying until Frank's daughter arrived from across town. "You didn't have to do that," Frank's daughter said, tears in her eyes as she hugged Marcus in the hospital waiting room. "He's not even really a customer, he just sits there." Marcus looked at this woman who didn't understand what her father meant to the cafe, what his presence contributed to the atmosphere that made everyone else feel welcome and valued. "Ma'am," he said gently, "your father doesn't just sit there, he belongs there. There's a difference." When Warren heard about the incident, he found Marcus restocking supplies with an intensity that suggested he was working through something difficult. "Frank's going to be okay," Warren said. "I know," Marcus replied. "His daughter called. He'll be back next week." "But you're wondering if this is sustainable," Warren observed. "If you can care this much about this many people without burning out." Marcus stopped his work and looked at Warren with the honesty that had developed between them over the months. How did Jamie do it? How did he care about everyone without losing himself? Warren was quiet for a moment, remembering conversations he'd had with Jamie during the cafe's early years, when the weight of responsibility for so many people's daily experiences had sometimes felt overwhelming. Jamie figured out that caring for people wasn't something that depleted him, Warren said finally. It was something that filled him up. Every time he made someone's day a little better, he became a little more himself. But what about the business side? What about making enough money to keep the doors open? Warren smiled, recognizing the eternal tension between profit and purpose that every business owner faced. Jamie learned something that most business schools don't teach. When you take care of people, they take care of you. Not because they have to, but because they want to. As if to illustrate Warren's point, the door chimed and Mrs. Rodriguez entered. But not alone. She was accompanied by two other women in scrubs, clearly fellow nurses from the hospital. "Marcus," Mrs. Rodriguez called out, "I hope you don't mind, but I brought some friends. I've been telling them about this place, about how you take care of the people who take care of others." What followed was a lesson in the economics of kindness that no business textbook could have provided. Mrs. Rodriguez's friends became regulars. They brought other friends. Word spread through the hospital, through the network of people who worked while others slept, through the invisible community of those who understood the value of being seen and appreciated. Within a month, the cafe's early morning revenue had doubled, not through marketing or promotion, but through the simple act of treating people with dignity and care. Marcus began to understand what Warren had meant about investments that appreciated in unexpected ways. Every act of kindness became a form of marketing more powerful than any advertisement. Every moment of genuine care became a foundation for long-term sustainability. "This is how Jamie built this place," Warren explained one morning as they watched the bustling early crowd. "Not customer by customer, but relationship by relationship. Not transaction by transaction, but moment of recognition by moment of recognition." The holiday season brought new challenges and new opportunities to understand what it meant to serve community rather than simply serve coffee. Marcus noticed which customers seemed lonely during the holidays, which ones were struggling financially, which ones needed extra warmth and connection during a time when the gap between expectation and reality felt particularly sharp. On Christmas Eve, Marcus made a decision that would have horrified his business school professors, but would have made Jamie Murphy proud. He kept the cafe open all day, serving free coffee and simple food to anyone who needed a place to belong when everywhere else felt closed to them. Frank came, of course, despite his daughter's invitation to spend the day with her family. "This is my family too," he explained simply, gesturing to the collection of night shift workers, taxi drivers, security guards, and other people whose work or circumstances had left them outside the traditional rhythms of holiday celebration. Warren arrived in the evening, not for coffee, but to witness what Marcus had created. The cafe was full, but not crowded, warm with conversation and connection rather than commercial transaction. People who had been strangers months earlier were sharing stories and looking out for one another, bound together by the simple recognition that everyone deserved to feel valued and seen. "This is what Jamie always dreamed of," Warren said quietly, watching Sarah, the young woman who had once hesitated to order coffee, helping an elderly customer with her coat. "A place where everyone belongs, especially the people who don't belong anywhere else." Marcus looked around the cafe, seeing not just a successful business, but a living example of what was possible when someone chose to measure success in terms of human connection rather than simple profit. "It's what you invested in all those years ago, isn't it? Not just a cafe, but a community." "I invested in Jamie's vision," Warren said, "but you've made it your own. You've proved that caring for people isn't just good for the soul, it's good for business. As the evening wound down and the last customers reluctantly headed home to their own celebrations or solitary nights, Marcus and Warren sat together in the quiet cafe, surrounded by the evidence of what they had built together. Not just a business, but a sanctuary. What happens next? Marcus asked. Warren smiled, the expression carrying all the satisfaction of an investment that had paid returns beyond anything he could have calculated. Next, you keep doing what you're doing. You keep seeing people, keep caring about their stories, keep believing that everyone who walks through that door matters. And the partnership continues as long as you need it to, Warren said. But I suspect you're going to discover what Jamie discovered, that the real partnership isn't between you and me. It's between you and everyone whose life you touch in this place. As Warren prepared to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at Marcus with an expression of quiet pride. Jamie would be proud of what you've built here. More importantly, your grandmother would be proud. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight and wonder of legacy, of carrying forward something larger than himself while making it uniquely his own. And in his pocket, he still carried the photograph Warren had given him months earlier, Jamie and Warren shaking hands across the counter, two men choosing to trust each other with their dreams. But now he understood that the photograph represented more than just a business partnership. It represented the eternal act of choosing to see the best in people, of believing that small kindnesses could compound into something extraordinary, of understanding that the most valuable investments couldn't be measured on any balance sheet. Outside, the world continued its relentless pace, but inside Murphy's Corner Café, time moved differently, generously, with the patient rhythm of relationships being built one conversation at a time, one cup of coffee at a time, one moment of recognition at a time. Some investments don't show returns on paper, only in people. If this story stirred something quiet but powerful inside you, give this video a like and subscribe to Panorama Legacy. Every small action helps these quiet stories reach hearts that need them. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what moment in today's journey moved you the most. And if you're ready for another story, one that reminds us that respect, dignity, and humility matter more than appearances, click the next video on your screen, because sometimes the greatest lessons come dressed in silence.